Hello, so welcome to the International Security Journal's vlog. It can be seen on YouTube and also through a podcast via audio only if necessary, but you will miss out on the photos, the wonderful interaction that I've got today with the infamous Robert Dodge. Robert, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. You should need no introductions, but thank you for joining me today. Your background gives us a rare insight through your military service, investigations, corporate risk, international advisory, and global security leadership. Now, what we'll be doing through this is looking at tech, looking at artificial intelligence, geopolitical risk, all that stuff that everybody wants to hear about this time. And I know one of your key passions, which is Global Security Operations Center, Intel centers, regional operational centers. Yeah. But I want to start with the foundation. So first of all, for those that don't know you, and I don't know who doesn't know you within the security space, but can you just briefly introduce yourself?
Mark, it's a pleasure to see you and be on with you, my friend. I'm a divisional CEO with Prosegur. Prosegur is, in essence, the third largest global security firm out there. We have probably about 180,000 people operating in 40-plus countries around the world. I've been doing this a long time. You know, humble roots, Mark. You know, I was a young kid growing up in Florida and got kind of going nowhere fast. My dad had died when I was very young, but he had been an officer in the U.S. Navy. I chose the military and ultimately followed tradition and went into the Navy. A humble guy, was on a guided missile cruiser, had multiple jobs, and this was in the mid to late 80s. Got to see the world. Iran and Iraq were at war. I was out there for all the combat with Libya, when the bombings with Gaddafi and all that stuff, and a few other crazy ventures there. After that, I ended up going to a university, studied criminal justice, got a bachelor's degree, and then got out of there. And then I ended up working for a high-end security firm that had some government and corporate contracts, a bunch of folks out of the U.S. State Department and the Marine Corps, and ended up doing some really high-end security work, kind of learning the trade there. And then I moved out to California, Mark, and got into the private investigative consulting side of the business. And I started as a corporate investigator with Nuttall Corporation, and then I got involved in Asia and international work with those guys. And my original claim to fame is I started at Pinkerton back in 1999 and rose to, in their risk division, the oldest private investigative company founded in 1850. So did a lot of good work there. Left there as the head of their international operations, 14 years, but we had operations in Asia, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and of course, North America. So I was the guy jet setting all over the place constantly. And then my next journey was where I met you. G4S was a massive company. I met you. And I remember back in Singapore when you were at Interpol, and was really impressed. And you ended up joining our organization there and running our office in Southeast Asia and Singapore. And then you moved on to bigger and better things. So that's a little bit I've had to morph into, the art and science of running a business, because at the end of the day, we do really, really cool things, but we also have to make a few bucks along the way. That's corporate America or corporate anywhere. So I've been doing that now at an executive level for, last 15 plus years, basically. So don't get to have as much fun as I used to when I was at the street. I'll never be the richest guy in the retirement home, but I'll have some of the best stories working in the security industry.
And that's hopefully what we can have a chat about today as well, is some of those best stories. And yeah, we did meet when I was at Interpol, and that was a lot of fun. I did enjoy those days. I got to wear more Hawaiian shirts than I know what to do with, put it that way. I've got a collection. This is an original Tommy Bahama as well. Would you believe that?
I love it. I love it. See, I still got but yeah, good for you.
Yeah, that's the way you've got to roll. So yeah, let's revert. Let's go back and look at those Navy days that you had, and there should be a photo up here of you. You look very spiffy.
That's one hell of a baby face, though.
Yeah,
I was 17, man, in there and doing push-ups in boot camp, and no mercy for me, man. So jealous of you guys, because we would see you guys in, the Indian Ocean or wherever on your ship, and the guys are no shirts, they're drinking beer or whatever the hell. We had none of that.
That's a shame. That's a shame. You should have had that. Now, from your base origin of where you're from
Yeah.
originally, how did that
Oh my
metamorphosize
God.
you to where you are today?
Mark, listen, I credit the military. It was both some of the best times of my life and some of the worst times all in one.
Yeah.
And, I credit that for putting me on a much better trajectory than I probably would have been, Mark. Just responsibility, just, there's consequences if you don't do what you're expected to do. The value of relationships, trusting the guy next to you whose life may be in your hands and vice versa. That
Possibly.
reliability that you have to build. And, since I've been in this career for 30 plus years, Mark, it's incredible. And you're right. It's really a who's who of former military people. I mean, I'm actually going to be I think I told you, in the Middle East next week, and I'm going with one of our clients who's also be over there. And, he's a retired general, and he's in
Yes.
corporate security now, and he's the
Yeah.
coolest guy ever. And everything from, really cool guys who have all the, Navy SEALs down to, guys who are cooks.
Yeah.
And everything, it doesn't matter, right? We're all brothers. We all, did our time. We all, did the mission, and same thing, right? With different militaries. I mean, I have great friends. We're, very close relationships with tons of great folks who served in the British military, other militaries really around the world. So we all have that common bond together, which is really, really cool. And I think they graduate nicely to what we do in the security world, Mark. And some of the best employees I've had have that background, because that work ethic that I think we
Yes.
build there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of them really just align with what we do, right? They
Mm.
enjoy what we do. They get excited in the morning about doing what we do, and they have, those core skills that help make it much easier for them to help to do well in our business. So, yeah, best thing I ever did.
Mm.
Learned a lot, altered me from going maybe left instead of right, which I needed to go right. Mark.
Pington. And I'll be sticking up this badge here that you've got, and also your ID that you had from Pinkerton. We never had any of that in private investigation within the UK, say within Dubai's a different ecosphere. There's not any private investigation, but Singapore and others, where you don't get a badge, you don't the ID is not there. It's a different state to state things. Talk me through that as well, because was it a straight line through there, those early chapters of what you had
Yeah.
with Pinkerton? What happened? How did you get into that from naval to
Yeah,
that?
that's a great question. College after military, and then I got into the kind of the high end private security contracting side, and then security. With Novell, which was a major high tech firm
Yeah.
at that time. And
Yeah.
then I kind of got into there, and yeah, I mean, it was when I first went, I mean, into Pinkerton, we had a guy who was a former ambassador, head of the diplomatic security, that ran all what I would ultimately end up taking over years later, the international security management side of the business. So these are
Yes.
the level of people, other major, military background people, major, 3-digit agency backgrounds. And here I am walking in, with my limited background compared to these guys at the time. But, it's the private sector, right? It's what have you done for me lately? And it doesn't matter how glamorous your background is. It's every day. It's what did you achieve? And so the playing field becomes kind of equal. And even on people who work under me, I don't care what your background is. In fact, some of the best people I've had the least amount of background. It's a horse race, and he who delivers and competes well is going to do well here. Like you said, a cool start because of great history there. They helped train Alan Pinkerton helped do some training for Scotland Yard and
You
New
did,
York PD. And I mean, just incredible history there. And I spent 14 years there in the trenches and, working my way up and very global business, like what I do today, same things. The problem might be, U.S. company, but their problems are in Mexico, China, India, Russia, UAE, you name it, right? The business. So
Yeah.
you're always,
I do.
you got to be a global citizen.
As you quite rightly said, that collaboration between the UK and the US and what went on there at the time, especially for global international risk problems, I'll put it that way, investigations essentially, whether it be from crime or whether it be for some malfeasance within a business. And as you quite rightly said there, the P&L is everything, isn't it, to global multinational corporations. And sometimes that gets missed by the security operator that wants to achieve his career pathway. If he wants to become someone like you, Robert, he has to understand that the client and the book of business is everything. It's not necessarily sometimes about the technical. It's about how good you are with relationships and also how good you are at appeasing the client's desires and wishes and overachieving that. So when you were in Pinkerton, you then went on to G4S to take on that bigger mantle role business.
Yeah, you're right, Mark. Great question. I mean, it's a results-based business, right? You got to understand the palace intrigue, no matter both internally and externally, no matter where you're at an executive level. Obviously, you have large teams underneath you, right? And you've got to and that comes with good leadership up and down, because not everything's going to go right, and business is tough, right? And it's never easy working with diverse clients across multiple verticals, tons of pressure. As you know, the government militaries, they give you job responsibilities that are very narrow, but they give you training and resources that are very wide. The private sector gives you the opposite, right? They give you roles and responsibilities that are very wide, and they give you very little resources or training or, hey,
cost center,
right? It's almost the opposite. And so you have to make those adjustments successfully here, and always remember you're here for the business, the value that you bring every day and as a resource. Because when you're successful in our business, Mark, right, that comes in multiple forms, right? You're solving clients' problems. You're a trusted advisor to that client, right? That's number one. Two, internally, right? You're playing nice in the sandbox and you're delivering results, which often are economic or financial, right? That's at the end of the day what corporations are driven by. And the difference between on our side, which is on the contract or, provider side versus corporate is, we are in essence the product, right? So if we go out and sell a big contract, we're a hero. If we solve a big problem, evacuate somebody from, somebody's drunk in a ditch in Mogadishu or whatever, or they're getting shot at and do that the right way, Mark, then we're the hero. Where, our brothers and sisters at corporate, they get some of that too, but they're not the product, right? We're the product here. They're sometimes a necessary evil. And, the corporate, they're not making the widgets or they're not selling the widgets that company makes. We're here. That's what we do.
When I worked with you, it was good to see that it was kind of about that scale of things and scaling up, scaling down, dependent on where you were going, what operating model you were going to put in. It's all about that. It's the same thing, but as you quite rightly said, it's the appeasement. Within Interpol, it's donors that you've got to appease and the members. For yourself and for corporate, as I am now and as you are, it's the client. Yeah. It's the money.
So, going back, right, when you were, I always preach and have practiced really for the last 20 years, intelligence-led risk management. So when I first met you at Interpol, great guy, but you were also a contact and a resource for me, right? That could help me, get contacts in the DRC, right? The law enforcement contact there or somewhere else around the world, right? So there was a business interest there as well. And that whole concept of intelligence-led risk management has been in vogue for many years now, but it started in the early 2000s when, the information and systems and technology started to be able to give you the ability to geofence locations and push out alerts that weren't all garbage. And they kind of later on were able to get very good filtration on them. So just what you need to know when you need to know it became, kind of more in vogue and it allowed people to make decisions to support their continuity of operations and security needs in a much more timely fashion. But the pain I went through trying to get, our last organization together to operate globally, right, and connect the dots, because that's the value, right? And I've worked for 3 large global security firms, and we're doing a good job of that here at Prosegur, but there's always still work to do. Nobody has it locked in, right? Because you got to take away borders, language, and culture, Mark, right? And as much as you can, because our clients expect that. They want one mug to hug when they call them or one throat to choke.
Yeah.
If I'm talking to somebody in New York, they don't want to have to talk to 10 people before you solve their problem in Singapore and go do it investigation or
Yeah.
pick up an executive at the airport. So that was really the thing that we have built or were building back in those days at that company, G4S, as you know, they were massive, right? I mean,
Yes.
not an easy task, 110 countries, 550 people. So that was the Herculean thing.
Subsidiary of
We were
Russ.
trying every
Yeah.
day. We were getting better at that.
Yeah, and I always saw I always looked at it as maybe the hard part was kind of the scale, the consistency, local country complexity, legislation, regulations, etc. And then those client expectations, as you were saying there. We just want you to fulfill the contract that you have signed with us. We don't care how it gets done. It gets done because you've promised that, and we are paying you for it. And also the speed of things that were occurring and changing, because obviously I joined that particular organization during COVID. Now, that provided for all of us a completely different paradigm to what kind of had gone previously. So when you encountered that, how did you deal with that, particularly for the client ecosphere and those that were serving you to be able to fulfill those contracts that were there at that particular time during such a disruptive global period?
Yeah, I think, Mark, a lot of those requirements and requests, as evaporated, right, overnight with COVID. So the international travel security business was not there, right? We had to basically pivot into other areas of civil unrest, pester corporations, right, from our usual playbook of things, right? So, but I remember once things kind of calmed down, I did what I've always done for the last 25, 30 years is get out there at the street level. And I remember we had some licensing and other things that were problematic. I came to visit you. We got on calls. You helped me to understand, the complexities, right? In this case, it was Singapore versus, somewhere else. But you can replicate those issues, right? And every day. So it's problem solving, but it's the key, I think, Mark, is treating people like human beings and actually talking to them.
Correct.
Because that's how you minimize something going, the wrong way versus, okay, let's get through this. Let's keep everybody happy for the most part, and let's solve the problem.
Yeah, yeah. I'm in complete agreement about that. That's how I go about daily business. It's human contacts, relationships, it's networking, it's making sure that people are dealt with correctly like humans. Corporate clients now are not just exposed to kind of crime or basic security issues, site level security issues anymore. They're exposed to sanctions, they're exposed to supply chain issues, hostile state pressure, executive targeting as recently occurred within the US. Detention, protest activity, cyber intrusion, energy disruption, supply chains that can't occur anymore.
Increased corporate and executive risk. We've seen a notable rise in anti-capitalist and anti-establishment sentiment, right, on the online sphere. And if you look at some of the executive statistics, right, on threats, violence, actual kidnap, whatever, all those put together, there's been some good studies on those recently, and they've looked at like a 2-year period, 20 to 25, 100% increase, right?
Yes.
So we're seeing more and more of that. Cold War 2.0 is playing out in real time and has, U.S. and their allies versus, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea and their proxies. It's heightening risks for Western businesses and their employees. You hit on it a minute ago, political detainments, unlawful detentions, acts by proxy, cyber threats. And then the other one of the big three, I would say that, to me, these are the widespread geopolitical and global risks is that doesn't always get enough attention is natural disasters and climate, right?
Massively, especially in Asia. Asia's a prime example of that.
What last year, right? What we had Papua New Guinea, we had the massive earthquake, tsunami there. No region of the world is. I can point Germany. I was involved there with floods last year. I mean, terrible things. And this year so far, I mean, look at all the deaths, the heat related deaths with all the the heat stuff going on all over the country. It's brutally hot everywhere, and it keeps popping. So we're seeing more and more of these changes, and those things relate.
I think that there's a lot that can be learned from history. I'm a student of history myself. We're in this geopolitical world at the moment, as you quite rightly pointed out, between various different axis ecospheres. And that does provide opportunity for the security sector, for the risk sector. And it also assists with other markets potentially, like Asia, like Vietnam, like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, all these other places, to be able to go, wait a minute, it's happening here. Maybe we need to securitize here as well because the world's changing a little bit, which then assists. Now, coming on to kind of giving an insight to the junior people that are coming up the ranks, or even people that are at C-suite in various different organizations, what would you say about those opportunities? What do you say to those other smaller organizations, or even the security operators or the leaders within those organizations that want to go to market? How would they deal with it?
They need to align with the threat and risk picture, right? And the greatest challenge facing organizations today is not the existence of individual risks, but it's really a convergence of risks, right? Physical, cyber, geopolitical, economic, reputation, human factors, and they all interact in a way that can rapidly transform, a local incident in Vietnam into an enterprise-wide crisis. So the art and science of being a converged professional, right? I think we all know that we protect vertically, but the bad guys are operating laterally or horizontally. And we need to do better. That theme is being accelerated by, decentralized infrastructure, remote work. AI is putting, fuel on the fire, right? They're all increasing the need for convergence. We own a cybersecurity division within Prosegur, and we're working really hard to converge, right, in the Global Security Operations Center space, right, to have analysts that have, converged playbooks that are converged, right? So that's how you got to mitigate, right? We have to be all the levers of security mitigation, right, from physical to cyber, need to be aligned, because that's the only way we're going to stop these things, because they're all the threat vectors are all integrated now. I know you know this topic really, really well, Mark, and you've been beating your head on the table like the rest of us for the last 10 years, but I keep coming back to it because it's not really happening out there, and we got to do better.
Do you think that some companies, and I'm more speaking about technological companies, maybe SaaS vendors, etc., are more confident because they've got tools to deal with them in a data sense? So dashboards and being able to identify these threats, but not necessarily mitigate them, because it's always the person, it's always the human that's got to physically mitigate these things, no matter how much AI you have.
Right. And I don't think anybody has all the answers, but they should handle scale, right?
Yes.
The scale problem.
Yeah.
Humans should handle the criticality or significance problem, right? We want to segregate that, patterns, did the pattern change? Okay, then maybe we escalate it to human. But if it's, business as usual, we want to handle the volume with the AI, the technologies that are out there. But if it's accepting or transferring or mitigating significant risk, I want a human involved. If it's major crisis management work, I want a human involved. Brand reputation, continuity, because the context is what matters, right? And, you asked about what should people be thinking about. And I think, the convergence of physical and cyber is one, obviously, but the world of AI, machine learning, advancements there, how does it apply? Both from the threat picture, but how does it, Mark, make your organization better, right? How do we leverage it? Because, you're not going to be replaced by AI, the old saying, but you're going to be replaced by a person who's using AI.
Exactly.
So that's the risk. So you better jump in the deep end of the pool, because there's still a lot of people that are not, digging into this stuff. And they're going to be behind.
They are, yes, and you've got to play with these tools that are out there. There's many different providers now of machine learning products, etc.
Yeah, oh God.
Popular ones, but the more popular ones you can have distinct use cases for. And as I think just occurred quite recently. We're recording this, by the way, for those that are watching, on the 8th of July, 2026. Last week, obviously, you had a company that the US government decided to say, hold back, don't release this. This is a little bit too much for the public. And the same then with another company occurred, which is another large company said, look, hold on, we don't want this getting into the public domain. And then they put firewalls against it and firewalls, and that's it. People need to understand how to use it, understand how to use it responsibly, and that it doesn't essentially get into that particular piece doesn't get into the hands of people that might use it nefariously. Now, coming on to that, we've got a question from Brian McNary. Now, Brian McNary might have served with you at some point. So he was in the US Navy from 87 to 94. He was then at Pinkerton as well, Chief Intel and Information Officer, for a number of years from 2009 to 2022. And now he runs his own company called 5x5. But what he's done is he's asked a question. He raised identity-based security in an era of digital doubt. And he asked what organizations should do, how they should go about business if you can't trust digitization.
So this is amazing because I know Brian well. I know him well. I hired him back in Pinkerton and he was my head of intelligence. So Brian is smarter than probably most people, all of us combined. So it's interesting he's asking a tough question here. The whole digital doubt issue is massive right now, right? I mean, deep fake videos, cloning, you're worried about answering your phone now and saying anything before you know who's on the other end of the line, right? There's been tons of intel alerts going out to people from, here in the United States, at least from the FBI and others. So, automated social engineering attacks, it's putting the bad guys on steroids, basically. So I think the big struggle here is they're leveraging, from what I can see from some of the access control providers and other things, is like a high assurance model, which is, going to take in, identity proofing on the front end, being much more comprehensive, mark their verifiable credentials, a lot of cryptology, which is, math-based and other scientific things to validate and credentials. I think biometrics with liveness detection, right? So there's a lot going on. I don't know all the answers to it, but what I'm saying is it's this multi-factor, high assurance. It's not who you are, is that, consistently validating you in multiple ways over not just one time zone, but really ongoing. So I think that's really where it's going, and it's tying you to devices, right, that have been authenticated. And if you're not on that particular device, forget about it. You're not getting in continuing, ongoing identity assurance through multiple vectors, because this AI, the deep fake, everything has, you can't trust somebody's face anymore.
And I think that what that leads on now to is JP as well, who is now the director of security at Walmart. He's been a special agent, etc., within the US Department of State, etc. What he's asked is technology now surfaces more risk signals than any team can act on. How does Robert distinguish what should be automated and what must always stay in human judgment?
My viewpoint's really more from the intelligence side, but certainly that, alarm, indications and warnings, right? What does it mean? How does it impact you? But the real gold nugget, is we want to separate structured and unstructured data sources, Mark.
Yes. Yeah.
Structured data sources have all the configurations, latitude, longitude, that will flow automated through that whatever technology platform you're using and get to the end user, right? And if you've set up your filters correctly, that will flow right to tell you what you need to know, when you need to know it. And you've set, I only want to know about, Dubai, this part of the school, this type of issue between 9 and 10 o'clock at night. It's the unstructured data sources, right, from some of the lesser media, other sources of social media, others, that is where the battle is at, right? And that's the often the gold nugget, right? That's the good stuff that you want to get. And that's really where I think a human has to come in, because you might have an issue in San Jose as an instance, and you might be really interested in San Jose, Costa Rica, but if you read the source, right, or the alert, it's really focused in on San Jose, California. And you have to ascertain that one way or the other. So that's where the human involvement is going to always come in until those data sources get much more comprehensive. And again, The Western world, United States, Europe, you have much better quality. The emerging
Yes.
markets, that's where the battle is, right? Getting sustainable, figuring out how to navigate, and then compiling that, fusing it into, scale, volume,
Yes. Yeah.
technology, critical risk, crisis management, human involvement.
Yeah, and so on that basis, then, let's say you are an advocate for GSOCs and ROCs, etc. How do you stop them, especially with um, ARCs? How do you stop them becoming an alert factory rather than a decision support function as well for that particular piece? So, say you've got a load of alarms coming in because client wants it configured to a certain level. How do you then deal with that sensitive discussion? How is your communication style then with client or to your directors, for
Yeah.
example, to say to them, how are you going to deal with this? Because the client wants it at this tempo, but it's sending our GSOC or ARC vendors crazy. How do you
Yeah.
deal with that?
Yeah, no, sometimes they don't know what they don't know, right? They think they
Yeah.
understand their enterprise. They'll contract with us, and we'll set up our SOPs, KPIs around a certain amount of anticipated volume. But if that we call it scope creep, right? If that gets blown
Yeah.
out of the water, then we have a real problem because that's
We do.
degrading our shared service model. And we've got to go back, Mark, to that client. But data is the key. You got to have people,
It is.
processes, and technology, to your point, that can capture the issue, right? And help them to visualize that. So often we're trying to help them to take that up to their, internal stakeholders, right? Because it's not always security, they don't always have control over everything, right? They have other business
No.
interdependencies. So we help them to help themselves basically, because again, they want to root out this problem too, right? False alarms, garbage, nuances, not critical risk. And so a good partner, in the command center, risk operations center space is going to have that maturity level and model, right, with SOARs, playbooks, understanding to help diagnose your issue and then help you to understand, hey, let us help you. And then there is an on-site component, especially if you're dealing with physical technology and adjusting.
Mm.
But really that's critical to us, Mark, because who or what are we protecting? Who or what are we protecting it from? And then how do we help them mitigate? So that same thing applies in the command center as it did, when you were, solving clients' problems in Singapore, right? The same methodology.
Now, coming on to that, there's a lot that's gone on in the US at the moment in relation to, individuals traveling from the United States and finding themselves wrongfully. You did an article last year, 2005, for ACES. It's kind of one of the most practical pieces because it moves travel risk away from this generic country rating system that people have
Yeah.
into a reality. And, what passport they carry, what background they have, social media, what sector, what data they hold, and how they intervene locally, and what they do, and who can help them. Now, for you, how should companies kind of brief executives with former military, government, intel, law enforcement, a sensitive sector backgrounds, because they sometimes are the ones that think they know everything? How do you then deal with those guys to be able to say, look, these are the standards that you need to meet here, this is what's changed here, and what you're going to do?
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
It's a great question. I actually share use cases of my own detainments
Yeah.
around the world. Now, these were not long-term things, but I do highlight one was Paul Whelan, who was a friend, and Paul was a client at a former company of mine. He was a security director, and he got caught up in that in Russia for many years. Totally unwarranted, false imprisonment and all that, but it happens. It can happen to anybody. I share my personal stories, and sometimes it's just it's a visa issue. Lots of little things can happen and cause that. And the point is, if it happens to experienced travelers like myself or others who I know have had things happen, it's wrong place, wrong time sometimes, and it can happen to anybody. So it's really about your preparedness, right? What kind of communication plans do you have with others, in case something does, if you are off the radar, who's going to know about it, how quickly, what is your ability to remedy, contacts with the government and other places. So it has to be seen as a risk because it has increased. And we talked about Cold War 2.0, their proxies, their advocates, right, will use this as a bargaining chip, and you may be the one who's caught up in that. So it has been escalating over the few years, and it's no different than if a terrorist or a bad guy kidnaps you. This time it's a a guy with a badge, right, in a foreign country. You haven't really done anything wrong. Hopefully, in our case, if you're a U.S. citizen, there's some great organizations that can get involved. Hostage US support you, and you can get declared through the State Department unlawful detention, and that just basically says this: we're not honoring that this person did nothing wrong, and we're going to apply all types of diplomatic pressure on you to release this individual. So there are
Yeah.
things that you can do, but you have to have awareness that this can even happen and why it's
Yes.
happening and how to
Yeah.
behave, how to manage it. Mark, and that's really the gap, right? It's not in people's crisis plans. It's not in their
Mm.
travel risk management programs. It's getting better. People are much more awareness to this issue, but it is a problem, and it's going to continue. Dual citizenships. There's a thing called the master nationality rule around if you're a dual
Yeah.
citizen between two countries and you're in one of them, that country's rules apply to you. You don't you
Yes.
lose the benefit of the other citizenship. And Iran was famous for that, right? Dual Iranians
Mm.
were grabbing people left and right. So it's a big thing, and you need to be aware of it for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a great deal of don't understand what goes on in various different geographies. Just because it's not, on the front page of Facebook or Instagram or on, Wall Street Journal doesn't mean to say that it's not happening. A lot of people don't research that. The travelers, they'll research where's the best place to eat, the best place to drink, maybe the best place to stay, roughly what's going on in that town or neighborhood, but not to the extreme. So, if you're going to one of the Southeast Asian countries, there's quite a few extremist groups down there. There's quite a few civil disturbances that are going on between various states and between
Absolutely.
bigger countries and what they think are going to be kind of partition countries as well. There's a lot that happens. I'm not going to name the countries because I like going to them, but it's
Well,
there's
see, that's your
yeah.
first thing, right? That's a good
Hey,
important tip point. You don't put things out on social media. You don't, if you're a business global traveler, you don't start professing your hate for a government of a country that you're going to go
correct.
to, right? You can't be doing that stuff because it's all
No,
out there digitally and they're going to use it against you.
exactly, and it'll come back to the fore as time goes on, and that's a problem with quick and easy social media now. Is that it is out there, it can be gathered.
That's right. I mean,
Yeah,
Singapore is one of the cleanest, one of the most efficient parts of the world, but
yeah,
what's the old the chewing gum thing there, right?
it is.
You don't
Yeah,
do that. There's the guy who did a little graffiti and the American kid, and he got caned. He spent a
yes,
few months in jail. So when in Rome,
yeah, and you've got this amazing amount of knowledge, Robert. You've been to a lot of places. We've talked through it today. We've gone through, your naval experience. We've gone through Pinkerton. We've gone through G4S and where you are today as global CEO of Risk for Prosegur. And you have put a lot of emphasis over the years on the importance of mentors, etc. As you sit there now as a mentor, what can you say to the younger security professional that watches this and wants to build a serious professional career in global risk? What should they learn first? Should they learn technology, investigation, geopolitics, business? Should they go out and get an MBA maybe? You are now the mentor at the top of the tree. So
yeah.
what do you say?
I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer, Mark, and I appreciate that. But global risk is a great. I mean, I wouldn't change my career for anything. We most people who work in it, we love it, but it's a very small sliver of the greater pie, and
It
it's
is.
not always easy to get into. So you have to work your way up into it, and then even then, it's still not a big sector, right? The overall security industry, right? The physical
Yeah.
security, manpower guarding side is the biggest part. There's plenty of opportunities there. There's integration, access control, video surveillance, technology is a fast growing part. So, cybersecurity, of course, is in massive demand right now. So I did want to make sure I give that disclaimer because there aren't
Caveat.
necessarily great global risk jobs on every corner, Mark. And so, we can't hire everybody here, unfortunately. And so a lot of good people will never have that opportunity. But I would say, generally speaking, technology, right? Learn everything you can, right? About that stuff is so critical to what we do now. Our ability like when we do risk assessments, Mark, to assess physical security combined with the technology pieces, the guys and gals that can do that at a high level are people that I want they're on my Rolodex. I'm calling them right
Yes,
away.
I'm sure those younger security professionals will be happy to hear that actually it's the keyboard that wins these days. And what I say to quite a few people is understand business as well. Understand how business works. If you want to do a little mini MBA, I suggest doing that.
Totally
You
agree.
as well, Robert, are an excellent tennis player, and you enjoy walking as well, and you clear your head through that way. What would you suggest to people? Because people are very overwhelmed these days with data, life problems, social media. What would you suggest to people? You know, a lot of people can't turn off. I have difficulties turning off. I'm a 24/7 person. It's just my background and who I am. But what would you suggest?
It's a marathon, not a sprint in your career, right? No matter what it is, have that sense of urgency. Time does move quickly, so you need to set some goals and objectives and come through on those, right? Because if not, you're gonna become the old guy and you're gonna look back and say, "What the hell I've been doing for the last 30 years?" You don't want that to happen, but find ways to de-stress. Have a great wife, have a couple kids, couple dogs. It's a journey, but you got to find ways to de-stress. You hit it. I'm a big love tennis, play a lot of tennis and sports. Walk in the middle of your day. If you got a stressful call, walk around the block, take your head away from the work. Make sure you enjoy yourself, your hobbies, keep those. Because if the work goes away, you got to have more than the work, right? Especially with males, right? We become our identity becomes so linked to work, and then bad things happen out there, right? And you get punched in the face sometimes, and you get up and you bounce back and run harder and faster. So that would be number one, Mark, is try and find your rhythm in life, your relationships with those who really matter, maintain those. You got to do that on the business side, is stay in touch with people. You can't stay in touch with everybody. It's impossible. Trying to help people where you can, doing the
Definitely.
right things. Again,
Yeah.
it's the old saying, be careful who you step on the way up. You might see them
Exactly.
on the way down. So if you live your life
Yeah.
that way in the security world, you'll be fine. Not everybody does, unfortunately for
No.
them, but the
No.
ones who do, the good people, even if we're competitors, right? I have friends at many of my major competitors, and we still talk. We'll have dinner, lunch, whatever. We're that's business, but we're still friends. We work together. Clients or whatever that may or may not use us now or whatever, but we'll hug each other, high five each other, and it's all good. There's a
Uh,
greater picture.
I think that there is a huge kind of propensity these days for individuals, no matter what profession, to ignore others because of technology. I would say to those people, listen to the words and advice that Robert has given you today. He's a leader, he's a chief executive officer, and for Prosegur. Robert, it's been an absolute honor, pleasure, and privilege.
Man, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate the honor and the time that you've given me to speak with you today in the International Security Journal, for sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert, very much.